Welcome everyone. My name is Faulkner. I'm the online event coordinator for staff development for educators. And I'd like to thank you for joining us today for Are You a Hot Teacher? Higher Order Thinking in Grades 1 through 3 with Melissa Dickson. Before we start, there are a few things you should know. To allow for Melissa to be heard clearly, attendee microphones are muted. Please use the questions text box on your screen throughout the webinar to ask any questions. We'll use those for our Q&A period at the end of the presentation. Most audio and video problems you might experience during the presentation can usually be solved by closing other programs and applications you might have open on your computer. The session is being recorded, and assuming no technical difficulties, you'll receive a link to the archive within 48 hours. And finally, at the end of today's presentation, you'll see a short survey, and by completing that survey, you do assist us in providing future complimentary webinars. For those who might not know us, Staff Development for Educators provides professional development for pre-K through 12 educators through on-site PD, PD events, web-based PD, and PD resources. We empower educators with research-based, innovative, and rigorous PD that's practical, motivating, and fun. We're pleased to have Melissa Dickson joining us today. For more than 30 years, Melissa has been dedicated to serving the educational needs of teachers and students as literacy coach, staff developer, and classroom teacher. She's passionate about providing educators with quick to implement research-based strategies. Melissa's ability to provide relevant information with humor makes her a popular presenter at all SDE events. I'd like to welcome Melissa, but before I turn it on over to her, I'm actually going to open up a poll here. We're just curious about what grade levels that our attendees and registrants are from. So if you wouldn't mind just taking a quick second and voting which grade level do you teach, coach, or administer? First, second, third, or all three grades. We'll just take a moment to let everybody jump in there. And so I'm going to close it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. So I'm going to share that out. And Melissa, we've got 22% of our attendees are representing first grade, 11% in second, no third graders specifically, but 67% are all three grades.
Okay, wonderful.
All right, and
Well,
with that, I'm going to hand it on over to Melissa.
okay. Well, welcome. I want to know, as you're in here, as Faulkner said at the beginning, if you have a few minutes and you've got some scratch paper by you, if you'll take a piece of scratch paper or some index cards or anything that you have and tear them into 4 different pieces, and then we're going to use those for an activity toward the very end of this. And on those 4 pieces, if you will take one of them and put a triangle, and then on the second one put a rectangle, and then a circle, and then a square. And we'll take those shapes, and at the end of the session we'll be using those to do a higher order thinking, logical, deductive reasoning activity. Okay, so as we're looking, when we talk about what do we mean by hot teacher, what we're really talking about is that method of higher order thinking that we've got to have implemented in our schools. Now as the testing has gone up and we've had new curriculum that's come in, we're testing at much higher orders of thinking, and we've got to incorporate that into our instruction in the lower grades so that these kids are prepared and ready. In the 21st century classroom, what we're really looking at is trying to have less time spent on the memory and memorization rote skill things that we used to do in the past, and put more weight on kids making connections between their learning, kids thinking through issues and different things with controversial topics and being able to do debates and that type of thing, and solving problems. So when we look at the activities that a 21st century learning classroom should encourage, we're looking at things that they now call the 6 C's. And that means the first C stands for connections, being able to utilize the connectivity between what the real world and what we learn in our classroom. The second one is on collaboration, for kids to be able to work collaboratively. Very rarely in today's time do we finish a project in isolation in the workforce, and so we're needing kids to be able to work collaboratively. Also to do creative production, where they're developing their creativity skills, being able to think outside of the box. Communication, being able to communicate clearly, so we have listening and speaking in part of our curriculum to ensure that they are able to communicate clearly and get their thoughts across. Also culture, to embrace the culture and the diversity that we have in the world, because our world is growing smaller as we're getting closer and closer to knowing what's happening in other countries, and so much diversity in our classroom. And then the last C stands for critical thinking and problem solving, getting these kids to think at higher levels of reasoning. And so these 21st century activities all really require those higher order thinking, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So as teachers, how can we support higher order thinking in our classroom? The easiest ways are through the questioning that we do, really being sure that when we ask questions, we're asking the right kinds of questions that ensure for that higher order thinking. Letting kids categorize and classify things. Having them make connections. Having them be allowed to have opportunities to make decisions and then to explain their decision making. And of course to work cooperatively in groups. So as we hit upon these, those are the easiest ways that we can encourage higher order thinking in a very natural sense in our classrooms. So let's start with questioning. If we're asking text-dependent questions, which is a requirement now within our curriculum, and when we're looking at doing close reading activities, all close reading activities should be followed up with text-dependent questioning. Text-dependent questioning is forcing students to use the clues and the facts that are in the text so that they can draw conclusions, make inferences that are going to really strengthen their thinking. So in the classroom, we want to be sure that we are teaching our kids about QAR, question-answer relationship. We want them, this has been around since the 70s, Taffy Raphael developed it, and basically it's teaching kids about the levels of questioning, and that if they know what level of question it is, they will know where to go find the answer. So I'm going to use the text Goldilocks and the Three Bears because that's something we all are familiar with. If we were teaching students about level 1, which is the in the book question, it's a right there question. That means that the answer is going to be in the text. The students could literally come up, put their finger on the answer. It's going to be in one location. It might be a word, it might be a phrase, it might be even a sentence, but it's going to be in one location that they could put their fingers on. So for example, if I ask students after reading the story, what did Mama Bear put in the bowl? They would be able to come in and say porridge. And how do you know that? They can put their finger on it because it is right there. And so that's a right there question. It's very, very straightforward. The level 2 question is also in the book, but it is in more than one place in the book. And so students would have to move throughout the book to be able to get the answer. So for example, if I ask them, where did Goldilocks go in the Three Bears cottage? They would have to travel from the beginning of the story where she was, moving into the next section, moving into the next section, and in order to get that answer correct, they would have to have all locations that Goldilocks was able to go. That's a think, search, and find question. It's still not very difficult question. It's still a very literal, but it's in more than one location. So students usually need to slow down a little bit, take a little time, make sure they get all the answers. The level 3 question is the most difficult one because it requires more of the higher order thinking. Level 1 and 2, very literal, but when we move into level 3 and 4, we're moving up into the levels of thinking. So a level 3 is an in my head question, and it stands for author and me. If I ask students, how did Goldilocks feel when the bears came home? How do you think she felt? There is nowhere in the text that it says specifically how she feels. Instead, the author has given her clues and evidence to the reader about how she's feeling. She screams, jumps out through a window, takes off running through the forest. Therefore, students can infer that she feels afraid. And so any author and me question is taking them into those, drawing conclusions, making inferences, using those clues and evidence from the text to support it. Again, text dependent. All 3 of these so far are text dependent questions because the answers or clues for the answer can be found in the text. When you go to level 4 question is also an in my head question. However, this could be text dependent or a non-text dependent question. So let me give you an example of that. If what I said was, have you ever seen a real bear? That would be a non-text dependent question, meaning No matter what answer the kids give you, they're going to be right, but they did not even have to read the story to be able to answer that question. So that is not text dependent. If I want to make a level for a text dependent question, then I still have to require something from the story, but the answer still is in their head, more than one answer choice, and there is no right or wrong answer. It's just still tied to the story. For example, if I said, what advice would you give the Bear family in order to keep their home safe in the future? They have to have read the story to know why the Bear family needs to be safe, that Goldilocks came in, but any answer they gave would be accepted. So they have multiple choice answers. That makes that a text-dependent question, but also an open-ended question. And so open-ended questions are the other form of question that we're going to talk about. Those are questions that don't have one right answer, but they encourage those kids to get creative and not be afraid of giving the wrong answer. So you're really building their creative thinking skills with open-ended questions. So let's take another text that we'd be familiar with. Let's try Cinderella. I might come back after reading the story of Cinderella and give them some open-ended questions. Something like, if you could change something ordinary into something extraordinary, what would it be and why? Or maybe I would say, what are some other ways that the prince could use to find Cinderella, other than the method he chose? Or I might say, if you were Cinderella, what are some things you might do to win over your stepsisters? So all of those do not have one right answer, but it encourages the kids to get creative with their thinking. And so those open-ended questions are going to be great for some higher order thinking and creativity. Some really good resources that would be nice to have. There is a book that Betty Hollis wrote called Question-Answer Relationships, that if you're trying to teach QAR to your students, this is a good one because it has text in there and then the questions have already been created for you to kind of help you get familiar with them. And then they also have some that the questions have not been, the text is there, but it allows you to design the questions or the kids to design them. This one is actually written for grades 3 through 8, but I have taken them all the way down to kinder with some of the different texts that were in there, because there's things like a recipe or a birthday party invitation, and the questioning has been shown in that way. Some charts and graphs, some things like that that I have used all the way down to the kinder. Another thing that might be handy to have on hand, either at your guided reading table or just hanging on the back of your chair where you do your story time, is to have those higher order question stems. You can use either, whether it's Bloom's taxonomy or depth of knowledge questions or Marzano's. You can Google any one of those and get those question stems and just pull them up, keep them on some little cards that are handy. Because here's what typically happens. If you look at the remember column to the left, so this is using Bloom's taxonomy, and the taxonomy of thinking gets higher and higher as you go. Those question stems that are there in the remember category are very familiar to teachers. It is not uncommon after a teacher reads a story to say, who was the main character, where did it take place, what happened first, next, how did this happen, whatever, how many, very, very low level questioning. But if we're going to get kids to think at higher levels, we've got to spiral our questioning up to those levels. So we need to move from that remember over into the comprehension to ask things like, what do you think will happen next, or what evidence supports this, moving over into application level. What would happen if? How would this be different if? Could you explain why, so that you're moving into application? Moving into analyzing it. What could you infer? How does this compare with? Or moving up to evaluation. Why is this important? Why is the setting so important to this story? How would it be different if the setting was set in wintertime instead of summer? Those kinds of questions. And then even moving to the highest level where they're having to, can you think of a different ending? What would you have done differently if you were the character? That's moving into some of that open-ended thinking. So in order for you to get kids to think at those high levels, you've got to develop those questions, and very few teachers think of those right off the top of our head. Hopefully, when you plan your lessons, when you sit down and plan your lessons, you take the time to jot down 2, 3, 4 questions for each text that you're going to read that's going to automatically bring your children's brain up. But if you don't, keep these question stems handy because you can reach over, grab them, and then create a question that will move those questioning and move their thinking to higher levels. Other activities that are really nice to have kids do that are going to start getting their brains opened up and thinking higher is classification and categorizing. When we're asking kids to classify, it's requiring them to take any materials you have and sort them according to either a specific rule or a set of rules. But the kids don't always know the rules. So they're sorting them, looking for those patterns, looking to see if they can find the rule and apply the rule. And if you let them do that, always take the time to come up after they've done their sort and have them explain why they put things where they put them, what were the similarities and differences between their groups. For example, if you're doing patterning with kids, what is going to be the next step in the pattern? If I change this pattern, instead of doing star, star, rectangle, what if I made that A, A, B, A, A, B, so you're getting them to also make that shift in their mind. So anything that's getting them looking at patterning. Concept sorts are another one. In this case, look at the columns across the top. You can see that as a teacher, the students have been given the concept, size, texture, color, and then they were given a lot of words that they had to then sort into the correct concept or categories that they're getting them to look at. So that would be like a closed sort where you're giving the kids the concept or the category that you want them to do. But just as easily, you can have them do an open sort where they have to pick something and then they have to come up with how are they alike and how are they different, and they have to create the category for how they're alike. So that the kids are having to design that on their own. Another one you could do is what's wrong, you don't belong. Getting kids to look at things and begin to make that thinking. So very typically, if you do this with kids, you're going to have someone that's going to say the one that does not belong is the shoe in the upper left-hand corner. And of course your question to them is why? And they will say because there's only one and the other ones have two. And you'll say, absolutely, do you guys agree with that? And then pretty quickly you're going to have another kid say, wait, I have another one. I think the one that doesn't belong is the one in the bottom right. Why? Because all the others have laces and this one has buckles. So anytime you're getting kids to start looking, they're having to look very, very critically at all the different things to see what is similar and what is different. And that's going to bring that higher order thinking. Another easy fix is if you've got spelling, if they're doing spelling words each week. Most spelling words in schools are done by spelling patterns. So have them play What's My Rule? And let them take the words that they have for that week in spelling and they get to do a sort. And at the end of their sort, you can tell them, all right, what do you think the rule would be for these words? Let the kids make a guess on this first before you open your spelling book or you go in and teach them the rule. So in this case, we have or, the or sound, O-R sound, the or sound can be spelled O-A-R, O-R-E, or O-O-R. And then the kids can go in and they can test their prediction when they open up the spelling book and see that that is the spelling rule. And the kids love this and it gets them excited about looking at their words and looking for those patterns. Another thing that we want them to do is make connections. It's important for them to always be looking for patterns or connections to bring that critical thinking. That when you start looking for patterns, you start making connections, that is practice for critical thinking. If they can come in and talk to you about something they saw on television the night before to a real-world situation, or when they're out at the playground and you've been studying shapes and they're being able to come in and make those connections between the shapes that are on the playground and what they have. That's where you're really getting them. As they're walking past, as they're going down the hall, look into the classroom on the right. how is that classroom similar to ours, and what things in that classroom are different than ours, so that you're really bridging that creative thinking and critical thinking. When you read, we want to always remind kids that good readers make connections. That's just one of the things that all good readers do. And the type of connection that good readers do are text to self, text to text, and text to world. So that anytime you read a book, you want to stretch your kids to be able to see if they can make all those connections. So for example, if you've read the story, The Puppy Who Wanted a Boy, and then you have the kids, all right, see how many of you can make a text to self connection. Somebody is going to tell you, well, I have a dog, and you know, they're going to tell you about their personal stories with their dogs or their pets, and that's making a text to self connection. So when you read a story and they say, oh, I have a dog, this is where you say, and you are doing what good readers do, you're making a text to self connection. You want them to know what these things are and bridge it. And then challenge them. Can you do a text to text connection? What other stories can you think of that might connect with this one? And they may share, oh, last week we read a book called I Want a Dog. Absolutely. Guys, can anybody make a text to world connection? Because that's the harder one for them. It's going out, away from themselves, away from books, out into the real world. And then see what they come up with. It's not uncommon for mine to come up and talk to me about rescue dogs, because they've been familiar with rescue dogs going in and saving people from buildings that have collapsed, or they have dogs that have gone in and rescued from fire. So it's not uncommon for them to have that, or maybe even people who rescue dogs from animal shelters. So this is an opportunity for them to bridge out and look into the bigger world. Make analogies with them. Ask them, if I get big is to little as happy is to, and see if they can't come up with those things. Getting kids to make analogies and letting them to see those connections, whether it is, in this case, antonym analogies, but they have synonym analogies. There's many different kinds. And getting kids to start making those analogies increases that higher order thinking. Riddles are fun, and riddles are another one that forces their brain to start thinking with some of that critical thinking required. So I may tell kids, all right, it is a fall color. Clue number 1, it is a fall color. Clue number 2, it is not red or brown. Clue number 3, it is also the name of a fruit. What is it? And when the kids begin getting, it's an orange, it's an orange, yes, I thought red first, but then you said it's not red or brown. You begin to see, when you start getting them to think about riddles, this is a good activity to do as a warm-up or as a Fun Friday activity to get that brain going and thinking. Another activity that is great for higher order thinking is making decisions. And I think it's very difficult for kids to feel comfortable because they don't want to make a wrong decision. They're very, very nervous about making wrong decisions. So helping them see how to make decisions, how to consider the pros and cons. And don't be afraid of making a wrong one, because what we're going to do is just make our decision, and then we'll evaluate it later. Later we'll come back and say, was that a good decision? If you could do it over, what decision would you change? But helping them to make that. An easy way to do that is even while you're reading. Have them decide and defend is what I call it. So for example, if I have read aloud The Little Red Hen to them, I may come back and say, is it fair that the little red hen does not share? Yes or no. Decide and then defend. And then they have to be able to tell me either yes it is and why, or no it is not and why. Or for example, if I've read the story The Three Billy Goat Gruffs, I might say, what is the most important item in the story? Is it in the setting of the story? Is it the bridge? Is it the river? Or is it the grass? Decide and then defend. And you get really good insight into the kids, and you're really training them to start looking critically at each of these elements and being able to support that with their thinking. So it's really important that as you're going through, you're asking those high-level questions. You're making sure that these kids are getting that high level of thinking, and that you're using, whether it's Bloom's taxonomy, whether it is categorize and classify, whether it is making connections, whether it's opportunities to decide, but then also to work cooperatively in groups. And when we talk about that, we're talking heterogeneous groups, boys and girls together, low socioeconomic with high, as much diversity as possible. And so when we talk about this, what happens when you put them in these settings is they're being exposed to the thought processes of their peers. All right? They'll learn there's more than one way to do things. So what we're going to do is something called logic lineup. So that's why I asked you to see if you could get some of these things made for yourself. I'm going to start with a pretty easy. I'm going to give you some clues, and your job is to put your shapes in the correct order. All right? So clue number 1, the square is on the left. Clue number 2, the circle is on the right. Clue number 3, the star is to the right of the square. Clue number 4, the triangle is to the left of the circle. All right, so let's try it. All right, so here we go. The square is on the left, so we put our square in. The circle is on the right, get our circle. The star is to the right of the square, and the triangle is to the left of the circle. Okay, so now I'm going to do this. I'm going to read it 2 times. You check your logic lineup. All right, so here you go. This is a little bit harder. This is great for getting kids to really think critically and do those listening skills. All right, so here we go. Clue number 1, the triangle and star are before the circle. Clue number 2, the triangle and star are after the circle. Clue number 3, the triangle is between the circle and star. Okay, so I'm going to repeat it one more time for you to check. The triangle and star are before the circle. The triangle and star are after the square. The triangle is between the circle and star. Now let's check it. Do you have square, star, triangle, circle? All right, one more, listen. Okay, so here we go. Neither the star nor square are first. Neither the circle nor star are last. Either the star or square is last, and the triangle is between the circle and star. Second time. Neither the star nor circle are first. Neither the circle nor star are last. Either the star or square is last, and the triangle is between the circle and star. So do you have circle, triangle, star, and square? Great activity, forces that kind of thinking. And the resource for that is from kaganonline.com, and it's called Logic Lineups, and there's a wide variety in there. The kids can stand up. They're big enough cards. They can stand up and physically move themselves in place, or they have smaller ones that the kids can do on a desk. And that's a great thing for them to think about. So some final real-world activities, have them think about what coins you need to make purchase, how many cans to water, how 2 things are alike or different when you pass. Those are also some real-world activities to support critical thinking. So don't forget, ask those questions, get those kids to categorize and classify, make the connections, text to self, text to text, text to world, and give them opportunities to make decisions, and most importantly, allow them to work cooperatively in groups, because that's what we're going to need to do to increase those higher order thinking skills. All right, so that concludes some of our ideas for that. Does anybody have any kinds of questions?
All right, Melissa, this is probably a good time for me to jump in here. And are you at the end as far as just waiting for questions? Okay.
I am. If they have questions, I'm willing to answer if we have time.
All right. I didn't want to cut you off if there was any more. So what I'll do is I'll take a minute to let everybody submit any questions they might have via that window on their screen. And in the meantime, I'd like to thank you for attending today's webinar, and we would like to offer you a 10% discount off SDE PD resources, events, or on-site training by using the promo code W012417 before February 24th, 2017. You might be interested in saving 10% and joining Melissa and other SDE presenters at our Iowa Early Literacy Conference, January 26th through 27th, or our Texas conferences for first, second, and third grade teachers in Austin, January 30th through 31st. Or you might be interested in saving 10% and joining presenters like Melissa and 6,000 other educators at SDE's 2017 National Conference in Las Vegas, July 10th through 14th of this summer, 2017. With 6 strands covering pre-K, K, first grade, second grade, differentiated instruction, and teaching math, all presented by experts in their field. It's the largest PD event for educators, an experience you won't forget. You can learn more about that event at sde.com/national. And of course, if you can't make it to a seminar or conference, SDE is always ready to provide customized on-site or web-based training that meets your school or district's unique needs. And for more information about events, training, or resources, give us a call at 877-388-2054 or visit us at sde.com. And we do encourage you to follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest. You can find us with the username SDE4Educators using the number 4. And thanks for your patience. And it does look like we do have a question for you, Melissa. Is Bloom's I'm going to kill this, or DOK better for pre-K through second kids? What model is better for kinder and younger learners?
I've used all of them. I have used Marzano's question stems, I've used Bloom's question stems, I've used the DOKs. I think the key is for you to be able to take those question stems and just make sure that you're starting with, especially if you're in pre-K, start with that low-level question. Can they find it in the text first, that basic level question? But then don't stay at the basic level. Start with that and then immediately spiral the next question up and the next question up so that you're going to automatically do it. And every one of those question stems will go through the hierarchy. So as long as you as a teacher, which some school districts use Costa, some schools use Bloom's, some use Marzano. It doesn't matter which one your school uses. They're all a hierarchy of questioning as long as you just make sure you don't stay with one level. Okay?
All right, now I'm going to squeeze one more question in, wondering if you have some resources or suggestions to educate parents on critical thinking so parents can support it at home.
Yes, I think those question stems, I have sent the question stems home with parents, and I have told them after your kids read a story or you watch something on TV, if you'll use those question stems to ask your kids questions and see if they can't come back and give you answers. But I also do remind the parents, anytime you can get kids to look at similarities and differences, which Marzano says that's the highest percentile gain, is by looking at similarities and differences. So if I can get parents to have them look at similarities and differences in anything they have at their house. It could be the clothing that the kids are wearing for that day. It can be the 2 houses outdoors. It can be 2 different pieces of toys that the kids have nearby. Anything that they have available, and ask kids to look at what are the same between these and what are different and explain them. That's a really easy fix for parents. And so any of those things are going to encourage that. Also getting them to do riddles and games and things like that. Get off of the iPads. Yes, there are some apps that will do that for them, but make sure that they're really controlling the apps that the kids are playing and that they're making sure that those things are higher order thinking and getting kids there.
All right, and looks like we are all set now, Melissa. I want to remind everybody that we'll post those questions on sde.com with the webinar archive, and I want to thank Melissa for joining us today. I hope everybody enjoyed today's presentation and that everybody has a great rest of the day and rest of what Melissa and I both thought was going to be a short week, but it's a lot longer than we thought.
Yes.
Thanks, Melissa. You have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.